Welcome to AMS on the Air. I'm Dakota Smith.
I am Irene Sands.
And I'm Jeff Rosenfeld. We're ready to podcast with the AMS about all things weather, water, and climate.
That was what gave Twitter its attraction, I thought. I thought the idea that there would be these short bursts of communication in tiny increments and you would be able to iteratively navigate. That's actually the way weather modeling works.
You could have the best physical sciences in the world and the best weather forecast, but if you don't translate that into a message that is going to change people's behavior, it's not worth anything.
Welcome to episode 3. On this edition of AMS on the Air, we're continuing our focus on communications. Once again, on how we talk about technology and its role in advancing our use of meteorology and related science. This time, we're featuring a conversation between Bill Hooke and Paul Pisano.
In a fascinating back and forth, Paul and Bill shared their comments on the past, present, and future of technology and weather.
A little background on Paul. He's currently the team leader of the Road Weather and Work Zone Management Team in the Federal Highway Administration, Office of Transportation Operations. He's been with the Federal Highway Administration for over 30 years.
Paul oversees 2 programs, one that addresses the effects on weather on transportation, safety, and operations, and the other that seeks to improve transportation safety and mobility in and around work zones.
Joining Paul is Bill Hooke, the Associate Executive Director of the AMS. Bill spent over 30 years at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration before directing the AMS policy program for a dozen years.
He also wrote one of my favorite weather books, Living on the Real World, How Thinking and Acting Like Meteorologists Will Help Save the Planet. Jeff, you're the one that suggested putting this pair together. What kind of conversation were you hoping to spur?
Well, it's not every day you get 2 visionaries together like this, so I was looking forward just to having 2 of my favorite people in the room, people who've been inspiring for decades in terms of looking ahead. And Paul, in particular, has been trying for years to get us to think ahead in terms of how weather and technology can play a better role in our lives through the way we deal with surface transportation in particular. That's one part of it. And the other part, of course, is that Bill has, as you noted in this great book, Living on the Real World, which is also a great blog to follow, he often is looking ahead at how the community can pull together observing resources and using them better and using them with the latest technology and capabilities. And so I thought the 2 of them would really kick off a good conversation for us about how to communicate these kinds of forward-looking ideas and how to communicate about them in a way that stresses the role of technology and people and how people use technology.
One of the conversations that was started focused on the automation of cars. Jeff and Irene, how do you feel about this new age of transportation that's quickly approaching?
It's good. The only issue I had with it was the parking. I just felt weird letting go. I guess trusting the car, letting go of control. It just felt weird. It felt weird to just trust it, I guess. It could be a personal thing, but it just, for me, it felt weird letting go of the steering wheel and letting go of the accelerator and brake and just trusting it.
I suppose that's a little like parenting too.
I guess, yeah.
Okay, you're ready to get behind the wheel and show me how you drive. That's a lot harder than, okay, you're ready to cross the street on your own.
Yes.
Look both ways. But that's that problem of letting go and in parking. I'm not sure I'm going to be ready for that. So that sounds particularly hard. I'm going to miss the gentle tap of bumper to bumper saying, "Yep, I'm in that space now."
And then also when you're driving, when you're on the lane, the Tesla, I drove a Tesla and they had the computers. So when you're going in autopilot, it just keeps you within the lines. But the weird thing is that when you're crossing a light where there are no lines and the cameras are not reading that, it gets thrown off a little bit. It's not completely there. So you still have to sort of pay attention. but you're not in control anymore.
So that makes it a difficult job to sell people on that experience, because driving is this ideal of freedom that goes so well with American culture and always has. It's always been sold that way to us by the big automakers and their advertising. Driving is that freedom that you don't have anymore because you live in an urban environment or a suburban environment. You're not out on the frontier anymore. You can't ride your horse wherever you want and do what you want. So there's something about the automobile that's taken that place in our psyche. So to take it away from us is a very difficult thing to do culturally.
I guess they will sell it more as you have the freedom to do what you really need to do, not to be focusing on the road. I don't know. There could be another selling point with technology advancing so much and our lives going so much faster nowadays that maybe appeals to another generation, or to the new ways of life.
That's the optimism that we really do need to take on these things and make them our own. So, hey, let's listen to our conversation now with Paul and Bill.
We live in a time of anxiety. We're swimming in an ocean of stress and tension, and every invitation of our culture is, you should be very worried. You should be anxious about your ability to make a living or matter to the world around you. And so you should spend all your time buttonholing people and trying to convince them that you're worth something. And we should reject that invitation. And we should remember that real communication begins with listening. And we should ask, if we're interested in the value of satellite observations, we should say, what hints do we have from society? What message is society sending about why satellite observations might matter? And it turns out there's a huge message, because the leaders of the world, whether they're democratically elected leaders or dictators, have said over the next 20 years, it's so important to us that food not be interrupted, that water supplies not be interrupted, that energy not be interrupted, that food, water, and energy be reliable and cheap. That's so important to us. We're going to spend $100 trillion on that over the next 20 years. That's 5% of the world's GDP. Our community, the people who build the satellites, the people who do the modeling, the people who try to apply that to societal benefit, we're the difference between having that $100 trillion wasted and having it actually produce a return on investment. So we ought to hear that and then have a conversation with the people who need that science that talks about how best to do it and some of the challenges we have on the science end on delivering, and our hopes for another piece of technology, which is a little bit mysterious to all of us, quantum computing and artificial intelligence. And it's very important when you're looking at tomorrow's problems to solve them with tomorrow's tools, not yesterday's tools.
How do you listen? How do you gather up that message?
Okay, you watch what people actually do. The first time I ever watched TV, it wasn't ours, it was the neighbors. And it was in the 50s, and TVs then had a raster. There was all this snow, so-called, on the screen. And my dad was a baseball fan, and we watched baseball games. But you couldn't tell the difference between the baseball and one of these specks of noise. What you did instead was you watched the players, and you could tell from the way the players were moving where the ball was going. So you listen to the world's leaders, you listen to what the Congresses and the parliaments and the senates and so on say, and where they spend their money. And that's the message. It's what they actually do. It's the old thing that people say, if you want to know what somebody's like, look in their checkbook. We no longer have checkbooks. But if you could look at their Apple app or something, you could tell, oh, Hooke has such a big brain, he's spending all of his money at Starbucks.
Sometimes I wonder, it may be best not to invest in Bitcoin just because you'll be able to watch what my wallet is doing all the better, right? But I find it intriguing, this idea of listening, because I thought you were going to say, I remember this phenomenon, but especially hockey games in the old days, you'd watch the motion rather than the puck, so to speak. But it's easier now, right? Isn't it easier to find out what people are thinking and by tracking what they're doing and saying than ever before? Not just leaders, not just the voices in the media, but how
yes and no,
act.
but there's a different kind of raster now, which is the noise of all the gossip and the people feeding and just all sorts of self-serving ways to obscure the real signgle.
Even with the social media tools that we
that's
study.
right.
Not just even, it's because of.
Because of it. But we see so many studies using social media to ferret out behavioral patterns and ideas.
By the way, just another quick vignette. The National Transportation Safety Board has looked at safe cockpits versus dangerous ones, and what they found is that the dangerous cockpits are hierarchical. There's almost no communication between the pilot and the co-pilot. The co-pilot says, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, to, whatever's happening. And the pilot is busy continually asserting his or her authority. In the safe cockpits, you can't tell who is whom. Everybody's finishing everybody else's sentences. And there's just a constant communication about what's happening outside, what's happening, at the instruments and so on.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask Paul was this idea of listening. Is it easier to listen to people about what they want from their roads because everyone has an opinion and everyone drives, as opposed to satellite? I don't have a satellite at home, but I have a car.
Well, actually, that's something that as transportation engineers we joke about, the fact that anybody who has a driver's license considers themselves to be a traffic engineer. So they've always got all of the answers. So I don't know that it is any easier. I think everybody thinks that they know how to solve the traffic problems. And we just still have to figure out how to find the signal in all that noise.
How do you feel the message has changed, the signal has changed over the years? Because this has been an ongoing development project, trying to get cars to talk to each other, get roads to talk to cars, and so on. And it seems like over the years, the technology has shifted under your feet as you go.
It really has. It's amazing how much the transportation system has changed and is changing because of communications and wireless communications in particular. And it's a lot of the potential and what we think it could look like versus what's actually being developed in real life versus what everybody thinks it could look like. And so, how we can harness the capabilities and the technology to actually do things better is turning out to be a lot more difficult than we thought. But in the way that this annual meeting's theme is about transforming communication, which I think is a fantastic theme, by the way. We're looking at transformation within the transportation world that's happening at the same time as we're moving towards the connected vehicle, the automated vehicle. That's going to change so much of how we get from point A to point B, and we don't know what that looks like yet, and that's part of the problem too. But so you take these two very complex worlds and try to figure out where the commonalities lie, where the opportunities lie, is what we're working on and trying to harness, but again, with varying degrees of success.
Is there an element of timing that is at play? Because maybe 20 years ago, the timing maybe wasn't right, but maybe now it is, or how does that change the message?
I think the fact that the playing field continues to change all the time just makes it more complicated. This is 10 years ago, we were talking about connected vehicles, the whole idea of wireless communications to and from vehicles, getting data to and from vehicles, providing new information to drivers, but still thinking about it as a human-operated vehicle. That was driving so much of our development and our concepts 10 years ago. Today, it's a completely different world. So much has changed with the advent of automated vehicles, where you're taking the human out of the loop to some level. That's a different paradigm. It's a different system you're trying to design to. And so that's just these challenges of the shifting that's happening, and just trying to figure out how we can capitalize on that to see some improvements in how the transportation system operates.
So when you have a track record in this field, right? You've been an expert for so long. Is it hard to communicate your expertise about something that's constantly changing and always looking forward instead of back at your accomplishments?
So a lot of people think that vision and what leaders do is changing society's course by 180 degrees. That's not what leaders do. What leaders do is listen to their societies and tap into powerful universal concerns that aren't well formed, going back to the anxiety we were talking about earlier, and giving them focus and providing a framework for addressing those problems. Peter Drucker, who is a management guru from the last century, said the task of leadership is to make knowledge work effective, which is just this problem. And that means creating people naturally have a passion to solve the world's problems. But most of us feel like, gosh, if I pour myself into that, I'll just get cynical and burnt out and the rest of it. But if you're a leader and can provide a framework, people look and say, if I plug into that, I can make a difference and I won't burn out. And that's what forward looking is more about. That it's not like you have some magical insight into the future. What you're doing again is listening, and the buzz has a signal in it, about what people are worried about.
I guess along that line, what I was thinking there is framing the challenge at the beginning is really critical to maintaining that longevity, to be able to see improvements over time. So I think this whole challenge of how weather affects the roads has that characteristic that there's still always more opportunity and more need. We haven't solved the problem yet, but because I think the way it was framed, both within the AMS and within the DOT, is that it gives us the ability to see what's happening and to see where we've made some improvements, but it can be, we can still keep chipping away at it. It doesn't suddenly become, that's last year's problem to solve. Now we have a different thing that we need to be focusing our attention on. So I think framing it from the beginning is critical to maintaining that longevity. And then as you have new ideas and new faces come in and want to tap into that, all of that's coming along, you can figure out how best to harness it for that problem.
And so Paul is a living example of this truth, which is it's easier to change the future than to predict it. and he has been changing the future of surface transportation for as long as I can remember.
But and likewise, I think I'm getting at your longevity in a way, which is remarkable because as a visionary, you've been on this topic ahead of everybody for a very long time, and I find that quite remarkable in an area where things have changed so fast. So I'm trying to pry a secret out of you so that I understand.
Well, I appreciate that very much, but at the same time, I think one could also say, you've been doing this for so long and things haven't really changed, have they? Why are you still doing it? Maybe we need some new ideas and some fresh blood.
Look at the program of the meeting compared to the program of the meeting 15 or 20 years ago. There are a lot of intelligent transportation related topics out there now and being presented. A lot of people who weren't there when you were there. So what you said about framing, I think, is very interesting because that's kind of a communications strategy. It's a buzzword. I get the sense that there's something stable behind the change.
And I think it also ties back to something that I learned from Bill years ago, which is looking for opportunities at the intersections. And that's where, again, I think it's very much that there is this meteorological community in the weather world, and then there's the transportation world. And there hadn't been a lot of crosstalk between the two. Certainly there was within aviation, and you could see the value of that. and the benefits and the achievements that they've made in aviation weather. That didn't exist, and now, and again, we're still pushing, and I think there's still more need for even more crosstalk. But I think that it's that intersection of those two disciplines that I think where the opportunities lie.
As a traffic guy, intersections are a lot more interesting anyway. But is that also true in satellite? How is that true in satellites? The intersections. What intersections do you look for?
Well, one intersection that really leaps out at you is technology pull versus societal demand. Lots of people see all kinds of new capabilities and new diagnostic powers that satellites could have if you added this or that feature to them. Then the question is society asking for that? And so that interface, that's the essence of marketing. It's probably the same thing for TV broadcasters. They've got a certain set of knowledge. They've got an audience out there that is preoccupied with everything but weather. How they're going to make their paycheck last to the end of the month, getting the kids home from school when they're trying to keep their job and not lose it and stuff. And how do you not break through prematurely, but never fail to break through when they need to drop what they're doing and focus on the weather?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you? How do you break through? I mean, you just have to know when they're ready for the message?
First of all, it's not command and control. Remember, we were talking about the pilot and the co-pilot and just the constant dialogue, so you can't ever talk enough. And you can't be hierarchical. The marriage example always comes to my mind. So if I go home and say to my spouse or my partner, gee, you get to live within the blessing of my strategic decisions and so on, everybody starts laughing because that's a non-starter. And you have to, with your partner, work out not only what's important, but how you're going to talk about it and frequently be updating. And that was what gave Twitter its attraction, I thought. I thought the idea that there would be these short bursts of communication in tiny increments and you would be able to iteratively navigate. That's actually the way weather modeling works. You're constantly thinking about, okay, we're going to take a lot of observations and we're going to see what happens in the next 5 seconds, and we're going to take a lot more observations and see what happens in 5 seconds after that. And things will work okay for a while, but we're constantly updating, and that's what has to happen in every communication.
What have you learned in your years working in a field where technology is important and you need to convey and listen to the messages that technology and opportunities are telling you?
I think one of the key messages is the human side of it, that particularly that at the end of the day you're trying to change behavior, right? Whether that's to avoid weather events that would create a lot of risk or could be life threatening. How do you get people to change their behavior? Which I think ties back to this work that just came out of the National Academy's Board on Atmospheric Sciences and Climate, which is recognizing that you could have the best physical sciences in the world and the best weather forecast, but if you don't translate that into a message that is going to change people's behavior, it's not worth anything. And that's not the first place that's come out, but that resonated through that study. And that's where I think, again, we are enamored with the technology and how this whole concept of cars even operating themselves. But at the end of the day, there's still a human behind all of that, and you need to think about what it's going to take to influence them in a positive way, and in a way that is not heavy-handed. We in the free society that we live in, we want to always get people to do what's in their best interest based on their own will, and how do we affect that and take advantage of where technology could play a role in that, I think is what we need to always remember.
The sense of control. Has there been any studies about, I drove a Tesla and it freaked me out that I didn't have control. Yes, it's very comfortable. You can go reading the newspaper, you can go on your phone, but the sense of control, it's also, because we often tell people you're in control of changing this, you're in control of handling, dealing with climate change. You're in control of, it's up to you,
Right.
but you're not in control of your car. You need
You're
sensors.
not, but I think that's a transition that you'll see.
Yeah.
People will become more comfortable with that as they get used to it, because it is so foreign to us as drivers who are always used to being in control, to give up the wheel. That's an idea that we would, it's very foreign and not something we would embrace immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But after you do it a couple of times, the expectation is that people will. And as long as you do it enough times and you don't crash, and you have a positive experience, it gets reinforced, and then people will not even think twice about it. I mean, that's not going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's going to take some time for that transition, but I expect that's how it will go.
My wife and I moved from Boulder to DC 30 years ago. And we could only afford one car. We went into work and came home together. Both of us were working. And my wife got tired of going to work with Dr. Jekyll and coming home with Mr. Hyde. And I had road rage in the afternoon. I would get out of my car and go confront drivers at stoplights and things of that kind. And when she retired, she said, "You're taking the Metro." For 3 weeks, I hated it. And then I thought, number one, why did it take me so long? And number two, it's probably the reason I'm not in jail right now and actually able to talk to you as a free citizen in the world. But the Metro or a bus provides a little bit of a preview of that. You're out of control, you're stuck in traffic, the Metro breaks down or stops, for who knows what reason under a tunnel or something. But you work through that because, as Paul said, the other side of it is just so beneficial.
We want to thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of AMS on the Air.
Next week, we'll begin a new conversation, what it means to bring your humanity into the mix as a scientist and as a communicator. For that, we'll be joined by on-air meteorologist Ada Manzon.
For Dakota, Jeff, and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the air.
Happy weather!